Welcome, everyone. Very nice to see all of you on this, it's been a very nice and sunny day, and now it's cooling it off as it does about every day, I think. I'm Larry Dorsey, the chair of the commission, and this is our spring program. We have a program in the fall as well, and so this one is going to be on the topic, as you can see on the screen. A couple of business items before we get started, and that is I'd like to, for all the other members of the Historical Commission to raise their hands, and Katie, you can do it too since you're a past member. And so if you have any other questions, you can buttonhole one of these folks with our funky little badges on and ask away. So just want to tell you what's going on in the world of the Historical Commission. For one thing, we have our two museums now, our Grasso Park Museum and the Asty Park Museum, open on the first Saturday of the month or by appointment. Grasso Park has been our interim museum for the last couple of years. Now we have both of them open, and the Grasso Park Museum is oriented toward agriculture and the Asty Park Museum toward coal mining. So we welcome you to join us at museum centers and on our couple-mile hike that we take every spring. And I also brought along a copy of our book, Lost Superior. If you haven't got a copy of this, they're available at the front desk, even tonight, I suppose. And that has a good history, visual history of Superior. I think that's about all I have to say. It's all, you didn't come to hear me, so I'll be happy to turn this over to our speaker this evening. As the saying goes, she wrote the book. And there's the book cover right there. If These Spirits Could Talk is our topic this evening, and the Columbia Cemetery, and Mary will also add in some of the, sprinkle in a little bit of Superior Historical Cemetery information too. So without any further ado, Mary Riley McClellan is this evening's speaker, and it's all up to you.
Okay, Larry, thank you. Thank you all for coming out. It's so nice to be speaking to history-oriented people. And I worked at Columbia Cemetery. I managed it for 17 years, from 1998 till I retired in 2015. And so I love having the opportunity to talk about Columbia Cemetery because I don't get to do it so much anymore. Also, I just want to note that I was only a co-author. We had, as you see, 4 people who worked on it, and we worked on the book for 19 years. Can you believe that? We were having so much fun, though, so it was hard to quit. This is Columbia Cemetery. How many people know where that is? Oh, quite a few. Okay, well, it's in Boulder. It's up on University Hill, and it's at 9th, and it's between College and Pleasant Street. And it's a 10.5-acre cemetery, and it holds the remains of a lot of the early pioneers of Boulder. And if you take a drive around Boulder, and look at the cemetery, you'll notice some familiar names, because streets have been named after some of these people, and parks and that sort of thing. So it's a very interesting cemetery. I'm kind of partial to it. And one thing I want to mention, we mentioned this in the book, is when we were working on the book, it was really strange because things kind of kept falling into place. It was just like, we got the impression that somebody was like cheering us on, and we like to think of it as the people that were in Columbia Cemetery, but we even came up with a name for it. We called it Cemetery Serendipity. We saw it time and time again, and I'm going to mention that a little bit later, but I just wanted to let you know about it. So Columbia Cemetery today is owned by the City of Boulder Parks and Recreation. It has about 6,500 people buried there, about 3,000 grave markers, and the City of Boulder took it over from a bankrupt association that was managing it since 1910 called the Park Cemetery Association. And when they took it over, they didn't want to go into the burial business. So they decided not to sell any additional plots until recently, because they just weren't familiar with how to take care of cultural resources. So the city took it over. It kind of fell into disrepair. And then in the, I guess it was the 1980s, Historic Boulder got very involved to try to preserve and protect the cemetery. And they started up a lot of good stuff, educational stuff. We got lots of grants from the State Historical Fund, and I understand that you've gotten one for the Superior Cemetery, at least one. So that's kind of fun. That's how we were able to do as much as we could. We ended up putting about $500,000 or plus into improvements for the cemetery. And a lot of that was fencing, and a lot of it was grave markers. Today, they aren't selling a lot of new plots, but they're apparent because the cemetery's so full, with 6,500 people. And we know where 6,000 of those people are, thanks to a genealogist who passed away last year named Mary McRoberts. Some of you might know Mary. She just put together a compilation of the people that are buried there, their life stories. We have maps of where they're buried. It's just wonderful. So I think that because we have so much information about Columbia Cemetery, it was kind of a challenge coming to the Superior Cemetery and learning about a new one, but I'm enjoying it. So thank you for having me. So Columbia started in 1870. Prior to that, there really wasn't a lot of places to bury the people's dead. So they ended up taking them to mountain communities for burial that might have existing cemeteries already. Or a lot of people went up to Valmont Butte. There's still a cemetery up there. And people were buried in there. They had their earliest burial there, I think it was 1863. So that was one location. And then by 1867, there was a place in Boulder that was known as Lover's Hill. And it's a mesa top that's right near Valmont and Folsom, if you're familiar with that. I think there's a sanitarium up there, a hospital up there. And that they had a lot of burials there. But nobody liked it. It was just very dusty, dirty, dry, ugly. They couldn't plant things, they wouldn't grow. So they were looking for another location. And fortunately, in 1867, the group that was the Masonic Lodge, Columbia Lodge number 14, moved down to Boulder from Ward, which was known as Columbia City. And then they bought 10.5 acres of land from a local gentleman to be used as a proper burial location. So that's how it got its start. And the purchase of the land was on cattle grazed pasture land. As you can see, the cowboys are rounding up their cattle among the headstones there behind them. And they probably liked going through the cemetery because there was a ditch there, Anderson Ditch, that predated the cemetery, and they had available water. So it's kind of fun to see that. You can see a lot of the old headstones. Now, this is a name that might be familiar to some of you because the Egglestons were important to Superior, having a school. I think it was until about 1911 they had the school here. This is the first person who was buried in Columbia Cemetery. The cemetery opened in 1870 in April. She was buried in May. She also has her daughter with her. We don't really know the whole story, except I would not be surprised if there was some sort of a problem with giving birth, that perhaps Anna had some difficulties with that. And her daughter died a month later. So there are Egglestons in the cemetery here, and I looked up some additional names. There are about 6 Egglestons that are buried in Columbia Cemetery, interestingly enough. And the woman who started the school, Sarah Eggleston, is buried there, as is her husband. And the connection, I think, is that with Anna, she was married to, I think it would have been maybe the son of George Washington, Eggleston, and that's all we can figure is why she ended up there. But the rest of them, a lot of them were buried there. I don't know why there's only one person named Eggleston buried in the Superior Cemetery. Well, Columbia started during the Victorian era, which was the time period when Queen Victoria reigned in England, and that was about the 1830s till her death in 1901. And it was a very unusual time. Prior to that time, cemeteries were very, I don't know, imagery was more scary, skulls, death heads. It just seemed a lot different. And the things that happened during the Victorian era that were really important was that it ended up being a time of rapid technological changes, urbanization, and a prosperous time for people. So this was a time that cemeteries were a fresh, new canvas, and a lot of people wanted to see these lovely markers put in there. They were also moved. The cemeteries used to be in congested churchyards, and they thought that they were spreading disease, and they weren't a good idea. So in the 1830s, they started a movement called the Rural Cemetery Movement or the Garden Cemetery Movement, and that's when the cemeteries became away from the cities. Like, for example, Columbia was located a half-mile south of Boulder, and now the city has grown up all around it. So that was a time period when things were really changing rapidly. And you also would see very nice manicured lawns and winding paths, and people would go and have picnics. Sound familiar, Bridget? In the cemeteries. And it was just a nice place to go. They were like the first parks, basically. They also did a lot of beautiful markers at this time. These do not remain today, although the one that has the floral wreath, actually that is still there. We had to reassemble it. The top was on another marker, and we did some measuring and so forth and found out that it belonged there. So we had our monument conservator put it on the right base. But you can see that it was a beautiful cemetery at that time. There was water, there was vegetation growing, there were just beautiful markers, and a lot of them, unfortunately, over the years have been vandalized. So that's been a real problem. Now, families sometimes wanted to extend their relationships beyond the grave, and they would put a fence area in where perhaps several generations would be buried. The fences are no longer there. That's curbstone down on the bottom. That's just outlining their plot. But in 1912, all that fencing, what did they call it, and other such contrivances were removed from the cemetery because they interfered with mowing, basically. And so they didn't want to have that issue going on. But a really beautiful location. You look up at the Flatirons, and it really was quite beautiful. Now, plants are another aspect of pioneer cemeteries that are interesting. Some of these old roses, I believe these are Harrison roses, they were probably brought out west by pioneers from back east, because when they moved out here, they came across the plains, they didn't know what to expect to find here, so they brought some of the cuttings and put them in potatoes. They'd cut the potato and put them inside so they'd be moist, and they brought them with them out here. You also will see sometimes native to the prairie plants, like prickly pear, as you see. The prickly pear has some lore about it, and supposedly it'll keep the spirit from wandering if you have that on top of the grave. Now, most cemeteries have something that's called a potter's field. And Columbia is no exception. These were usually portions of the cemetery that were not very attractive, although in Columbia that's kind of hard to find a place that isn't attractive. But these were the areas where the poor and unknown people were buried. It got its name from back in Jerusalem, there was a field that had clay in it that was used by potters to get the clay. Well, when Judas betrayed Christ, he was paid 30 pieces of silver. And he felt bad and he wanted to give it back. So he took it to the treasury, and the treasury said, well, this is blood money. We can't accept this. So they decided instead to buy this little parcel of land that the potters got clay from and use it to bury strangers and unknown or poor people. So that is just almost every cemetery that I've been to has a potter's field. I'm not sure about Superior, but they probably did have an area where unknown people were buried. Anyway, a lot of the stones are very interesting because most of them are people that were not from very good circumstances, and they didn't have a lot of money, so they had to use what was available. And a lot of the markers are made from Lyons sandstone, which is pretty much available for the taking if you go up into the foothills. It can be engraved, as you can see, and we have that's back in the north or the southwest corner of the cemetery. You can see one of them has gotten a lot of mower damage. That's what happens when the mowers get too close to the markers. So that's our potter's field. We also have some interesting markers that are called white bronze. They're metal, and they're not bronze at all. They're almost pure zinc. And this is zinc that has been poured into molds and then soldered and fused together. So they're hollow on the inside. They're actually quite pretty, and they were very popular. I think they started around 1876, and they were used up until about 1912. They were fabricated elsewhere, and then they were brought and assembled here at times. And you can see that there's panels on them, and those could be taken off so that if you wanted to add a name or decoration or something like that, you could do that. Unfortunately, though, they also were susceptible to vandalism. So I was fortunate to find a place near Pittsburgh that would do this work, a conservation company, and we shipped 6 of these off there, and they did a great job of getting them back together. So now that one has a panel in it. There was some folklore also associated with them. That it was thought that maybe a lazy caretaker would leave his rakes or brooms inside of the hollow part of it if they were missing a panel, or they were also considered to be useful for hiding liquor. These are also for people that probably had impoverished circumstances that wanted to have a marker in spite of not having a lot of money. And my guess is this was maybe perhaps a plumber that was moonlighting. You can see it's sheet metal with pipe going around it. And after researching the people, they really were from impoverished circumstances. So I think that was something that was happening just in Boulder, because I've never seen markers like this anywhere else. I would love to, but I haven't. Particularly poignant are the markers of children that you see in a cemetery. And often these can be determined by seeing if there's a lamb or a dove, maybe a broken-winged dove to indicate a life cut short. And the lamb and the dove are associated with the innocence of nature. And Victorians believe that if their children died, they went straight to heaven because they had not been exposed to the bad in the world yet. So the doves and the lambs were also associated with innocence and purity, and that's why you see them on a lot of the markers. Now, sometimes the children did not survive beyond maybe a few hours or a few weeks or a few months. At that time, I think children comprised about 40% of all the deaths back before the turn of the century. So you weren't sure if you wanted to name your child or not because you didn't know if it was going to be alive. So some people just did this baby thing. This is the only photograph that we have in Columbia Cemetery. This is little Wesley Baker. He died from pneumonia, they believe, but this is kind of an interesting marker. It's a porcelain enamel that's been put on there. And this is a good process because it lasts forever. The poor baby, apparently somebody tried to vandalize the face, but it's actually held up pretty well, especially being the only one. So these are kind of interesting to see. This seems to be popular with people that are from the European area, and it's Italy. They brought this tradition with them. So if you see these, it's probably an ethnic custom. Now this is here it is, Larry. This is the marker that most people are aware of that's in Columbia Cemetery. It's the most unusual marker, and it's the one belonging to little Paula Barchelon, who was not quite 2 when she died. She was a girl that had a family that still has relatives in Boulder, but the story behind this is that Paula would go to this artist's studio, Dwayne Valentine in Boulder, a friend of the family. And when Paula would see, there was a picture on the wall that looked like this, and Paula would kind of point towards it. So when she died, they decided to make a fiberglass ball. And what it actually is an anatomical heart. So if you can see there in the middle, that's what it's supposed to be. This has got a lot of lore associated with it too, because I was walking through Columbia one day and some little kids from the school next door, Flatirons, were talking about this stone, and one of them said, "You know what happened to that little girl, don't you? She died choking on a sucker."
Oh.
So they call it the lollipop stone. But it's a very unusual concrete fiberglass, and you can see the Valentine carved in the bottom there, Dwayne Valentine. Now, military markers are also a good component of Columbia Cemetery and many other cemeteries. We have over 300 veterans that are buried in Columbia Cemetery. Most of them were from the Civil War. I think the most recent war that we had some from was maybe the Korean War. But these two on the right are actually from Superior Cemetery. And you can see that James, what is that?
Morton.
What's his first name? James. Yeah, James Morton. But these are issued by the government for free for a veteran if you can prove that you were honorably discharged and were in the service. So these two are really interesting, especially the one on the bottom, because there's also a brass-looking plaque that's in the ground. And the government will not give you a new one unless you destroy the old one. So I'm guessing that somebody must have gotten there and gotten all the names and all the information off about this gentleman. And what was his name? Let's see. I thought it would jump out at me. But he's buried there, as well as Mr. Morton. And then this other picture is of Columbia Cemetery's section of the cemetery. We have 2 sections where mostly military people are buried. They belong to the GAR. Those plots do. Oh, the other thing, I'll tell you that on the next slide. So if you're a Union soldier, your government-issued white marble headstone will have a rounded top, as you can see there in the middle and on the left. If it's a Confederate marker, it comes to a point. And I remember being at a workshop down in Savannah, and the guy was telling us about this. And I asked him, well, why does that one come to a point? And he said, well, it's so none of you darn Yankees will sit on them.
Oh.
Which I got a kick out of. My personal favorite markers, I think, are the homemade markers. They're so unique. They're so personalized. This one is of an African American who's buried in Columbia Cemetery, Harold Ray. And you can see there's broken pieces of glass that have pressed into the concrete. There's also pieces of porcelain china, because you can actually see the lettering on the porcelain china. And there's supposed to be a custom that you break the plate after the last meal of the person who's going to be buried and use that to press into the concrete of the stone. So it's just kind of an interesting custom. A couple of other noteworthy homemade folk markers include the Lily Swazo. You can see that that was during the Great Depression. That was a time when people didn't have a lot of money, so they had to sometimes make things, and they made this marker for Lily. And then the one on the right, that's Ellen Bishop. And Ellen Bishop, her children actually made that marker out of marbles and a sack of concrete. They, after she died in the 30s, they came out in, I think, the very early 40s, the kids did, and they picked up a bag of concrete and a bag of marbles. And they had a picnic, and then they made this marker for their mom. So I thought that was pretty neat. And the people in the neighborhood around it have replaced a lot of those marbles if they've come loose over time. Well, the epitaph is probably really the heart and soul of most grave markers, and sometimes the most interesting thing to read. This one says, beware, kind friend, as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I, as I am now, so you must be, prepare for death and follow me. So this was, the Victorians accepted death. They believed in salvation. Prior to that, there wasn't a thought about salvation. You saw you're dead, you're dead. But at least they believed in salvation. And so they're trying to just pass on the information about prepare for your death. Some of the markers are great if you're a genealogist. This is one in particular. This is the guy who does the Scottish-Irish Festival up in Estes Park. And he's very interested in his genealogy, so he included a lot of his family names. And this is a treasure if you're a genealogist and you stumble on a marker like this. So this is a big marker in Columbia. We also have some that are in other languages, like French. I'm trying to think of the other, I think Swedish, German. And a lot of these were people that came over from Europe to do mining. Now, I don't know if this was a coal miner or a gold miner or what he was, but he's wearing the typical mining outfit with the candle and the wax that's melted all over his shirt. But there were quite a few markers that belonged to people that were involved in mining. I particularly liked this one because it tells the story of his death. My boy to me so dear died not of care or fear, but the awful bucket from a careless hand crushed the head that's lying here. So he was in a mine shaft, and the bucket killed him. It became a lethal projectile. We have a lot of interesting symbolism, too, that we had that in our book. We have a whole section that tells you what things mean. And so often you'll see a sheath of wheat with a scythe, and this usually means reaping, the reaping of your life when you die. The daffodils or jonquils, that's the loss of youth, is what that symbolizes. The open book that you see down there, that can mean a couple of different things. It can mean either the good book, the Holy Bible, or somebody who was involved with teaching. And below that is a Masonic symbol for the Masons. And I think I'll show you another one of those. The anchor is usually hope or somebody who's in the seafaring profession. So they have a lot of different meanings. So usually it's not just one. Now, before about, the 1920s or so, there were a lot of people that were looking for stuff to do. They didn't have the movies, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have the radio to listen to, so they had a lot of fraternal organizations or secret societies, and this is what they would do for fun. They'd get together and have camaraderie. And there were a number of those. The one on the left there is a typical woodman of the world. And you can see it's a tree trunk that's been cut off. And almost all of the woodmen of the world have the symbol that you see there at the bottom of an axe and a wedge and a mallet, or a beetle, as they called it. They're beautiful. They have very intricate carvings on them. Sometimes they have growth rings that indicate the age of the person who died. I mean, they're very intricate. Above or to the right, that's a couple of different fraternal organizations. The one on the left is the Masonic one that you saw a second ago, and that's got a square and compass. They were builders. Maçon means building in French. And they also had a group called the Knights of Pythias. And that's what the one is on the right, with the knight and the shield and the axes. And below that, there's the Independent Order of Oddfellows. That's a symbol. It's got the 3 chain links, and they're sometimes called the 3-link society. They also have that shaking hands as a typical Oddfellows symbol. You can see on the left, the hand has kind of a frilly sleeve, and the one on the right is a masculine one. So it's kind of also can mean welcome to heaven. And you see the 3 links there as well. So a lot of, mysterious symbols, but once you learn about what they mean, it's kind of fun to check them out. Now, these are 2 that are from Superior, and you can see the shaking hands are on the William Clark marker. Gone but not forgotten. And the one on the left, it's kind of hard to see, but there's the 3 rings with FLT, which stands for Friendship, Love, and Truth, which were mottos of the Oddfellows. They also, on the top part, it's hard to see it, but they have oak leaves. And that was also a symbol of strength and long life, like an oak tree. These are another one of my favorites. If you can see errors that occur on grave markers, it's not that uncommon. We've got a number of them in Columbia. Do you see what's wrong with the top one? What?
It's then instead of then.
Very good. So it says then instead of than. And the one on the bottom, what's the problem with that one? Yeah, booted on earth to bloom in heaven. That was a typical phrase that you would see on Victorian headstones. The monument makers had books that had passages in them that you could choose what you wanted to have carved on the monument. And that was a very, very popular one. Sometimes you'll see backwards letters, and you have to remember that a lot of these stonemasons, they may not have had an education, so they were just copying what they saw, and sometimes they didn't quite get it right. So another chapter we have is called Prepare for Death and Follow Me, and that covers what happens to you after you die for the most part. And this woman is clearly grieving. This is her husband, Louis Upton, who's there. She's decked out in the Victorian mourning outfit, all black, and they would do this sometimes for a year at least, as they were grieving. It was not uncommon during the Victorian era. We didn't have the funeral homes like we have now. So what would happen is you would just have the funeral or a person laid out at home, usually in the parlor, and often the family and the friends would participate by building the coffin, maybe digging the hole at the cemetery. This happens to be Adelaide Mackey, and that's a picture of her husband, Andrew Mackey, of Mackey Auditorium, if you're familiar with University of Colorado. Quite a wealthy man. Flowers are very common to have there because they mask odors. And if you had, someone in your parlor, you wanted to be aware of that. There had some lore associated with this too. If you took the person out of the house to go to the cemetery, you wanted to make sure that you took them out feet first instead of head first, because otherwise they'll be looking back at you and you'll have to follow them. Now, undertaking really started out as a business that was mostly cabinet makers or furniture makers back prior to about the 1870s or 80s. And the undertaking got its start actually from the Civil War. They were trying to figure out how to bring the boys back home from the Civil War and try to keep them preserved so they can do the train trip. So one of the surgeons in the field figured out if you use arsenic and if you use mercury and some other nasty toxic things, you can preserve the person well enough to get them home. The person who did most of the undertaking in Boulder was Johnny Treeseyes, and he was just beloved by the community because he would give people rides in his horse and carriage to church, elderly people. He would give people that were poor turkeys at Thanksgiving time. So he was very, very good guy. But this building that he worked out of is right at 11th and Pearl. And it's Salt's Restaurant, if you've ever been to Salt. So it had its start as a undertaking mortuary. Another concern during the latter part of the 19th century was body snatching. And the reason for this was that if you were attending medical school, you had to, in order to graduate, you had to dissect a body. Well, bodies weren't all easy to come by. Most of the time, they were people that were poor or they were given by hospitals, but they weren't easily available. So there were actually some theft of bodies. We've heard about them at Columbia. We don't have any actual proof of it, but there is a story that there was a body snatched from there in the 1890s. The medical school at CU started in 1883, and they moved on to Denver in the 1920s. When they were moving, they found a bunch of boxes in the lab, and these boxes held bones and remains of the people who were studied by the anatomy classes. So they bought a couple of lots in Columbia Cemetery, and they put the boxes in those lots. So it's kind of interesting that they did that. This is one of our most well-known people, Jane Doe, and she was found just below Boulder Falls by a couple of students back in 1954, and she was naked, and all she had was a few bobby pins and an appendectomy scar, and her color of her hair. They figured that she was about 20, and that she had almost perfect teeth, so they couldn't do dental stuff on her teeth. Also, she had been laying there for about a week, so animals had destroyed some evidence like fingerprints, eye color, and that sort of thing. But it was not known who did this. They said they found her down there, bludgeoned, bruised, and they think she had been there about a week before these two students discovered her. Well, the citizens of Boulder decided they didn't want her to be buried in the potter's field. So they put their money together and decided to buy her a plot in the cemetery, and then this stone was donated for her as well. And it sat silently for about 50 years until more recently, Sylvia Pedham, I think a lot of you are familiar with Sylvia. She's written a book about this, but she was determined to find out the identity of this girl and return the remains to her family. So there were all kinds of options available today that weren't available back then. You could do DNA. You could do facial reconstruction. And Sylvia brought in these volunteer experts that were able to do all this. So they disinterred her from Columbia. And she was, as you can see, she was a beautiful woman. She was bossy, beautiful, and I think she was 18. She had been married twice by then and divorced once and was going through her second divorce. She had disappeared in Phoenix. She was supposed to meet her sister to go to a movie, and she just wasn't seen and wasn't ever seen again by them. So everybody wondered about this for the longest time. There was not any information that they were able to obtain from actually doing the facial reconstruction. But in 2009, Sylvia got a call, and it was from a DNA mitochondrial place that had found somebody that they thought was a match. Well, it was actually Dorothy Gay Howard's sister, who was still alive, and Dorothy Gay Howard's grandniece had looked at the Doe Network, which is a place, it's like a clearinghouse for missing people, and she read about this woman in Boulder that sounded so much like her aunt. So she thought, well, we still got a sibling alive, let's do a test. And they did, and sure enough, it was a match. Jane Doe had already been reburied by then, before they found out. But in 2009, she was finally reburied with family present, and they were all pleased to leave her in the cemetery at Boulder, which we were glad because she kind of felt like a relative at that point. Another big killer was a lot of the epidemics and the diseases that went on. We didn't have the antibiotics that we have today and the medical skills to heal these, and the vaccines. So there were problems with a lot of diseases that are not a problem today. But just so you can see some of the epidemics and when they happen, you can often suspect an epidemic if you see a number of headstones in a cemetery that are the same year. For example, 1918 to 1919 or so, that's when we had the Spanish influenza epidemic, and that killed a lot of people. And here are markers that mark the location of two sisters who died from Spanish flu. And these are homemade markers again. They're pipes that have concrete molded around them, and they're made to look like trees, again indicating a life cut short. These were two young girls. And we have our share of prostitutes in the cemetery as well. Almost every frontier town had a red light district, and Boulder was no exception. The red light district was actually located where the library is located today, which is kind of ironic. But we have a number of prostitutes that are buried there, and they all have great stories, and we've got that in the book if you're interested in seeing it. I know. Another one of our most famous burials is Tom Horn. And have you all heard of Tom Horn? Tom Horn was one of the last gunslingers of the Old West. And he had done it all. He had been a Pinkerton agent, a cowboy, a stagecoach driver, a circus performer. And he had left home when he was only a young boy and came out west. He quickly learned how to speak Spanish. And he was very good at tracking. So he was put to work tracking, and he was actually the one who found Geronimo and talked him into surrendering. So he kind of has a claim to fame. But what happened to him was he got a job later on up in Wyoming with the Stock Owners Association, and that was during the cattle wars. There were people up there that had no interest in having anything else but cattle grazing the land. And there was a sheep herder up there whose last name was Nickel, and he had a son, and they were raising sheep on cattle, supposedly cattle land, although they were there first. And one day they found the boy, the son, dead. He had 2 bullets had gone through him, and he had a rock under his head. And that was a Tom Horn trademark. He was kind of a bounty hunter. He went out and would kill people. He said, killing men is my specialty. So he, anyway, was found guilty of doing this. He was brought down from Cheyenne, and he actually was hung up in Cheyenne and died up there. But his body was brought down to Boulder, and he was buried in Columbia Cemetery because his brother had a plot there. So he's buried in Columbia next to his brother. And more often than not, if you go by his stone, it has coins on it, or, you know, just indicating people are thinking of him and know his story. Another famous person is Mary Rippon, and Sylvia wrote a book about this woman too. This was one of the first professors at a state university in the country that was a female. And she came out to Boulder, and when she got off the train in 1878, she was asked how Boulder looked to her, and she said, glorious. She loved wildflowers, and she was just a beloved teacher. She taught a lot of different subjects, but it was mostly German and French. And she also started the theater, the Mary Rippon Theater. She was very interested in that. She planted a lot of those big old evergreens that are on the campus, took a real interest in that. But she had a deep, dark secret. She had the misfortune of falling in love with one of her students that she taught at CU, who was much younger than her. She ended up getting pregnant and took a sabbatical, went off to Europe, and gave birth to her daughter Miriam over there. She actually did marry the boy in St. Louis, but the marriage dissolved, and the daughter never knew that Mary Rippon was her mother. So I'll leave it at that. You can read the book to get the rest of the scoop, but it's quite a story.
Eventually she did.
What's that?
I think eventually she did.
Oh, she did find out. Yeah, you're right. The daughter found out, or not the daughter, let's see. It was, I think, her grandson that came in and said, my grandmother was Mary Rippon at CU. So read the book. We have something at the cemetery to teach people about history called Meet the Spirits, which is a wonderful educational tool where we have people dress up as spirits that are buried in Columbia Cemetery. They stand next to their grave and they tell their story in first person. So this happens to be the Mart Parsons, who was one of the very first park rangers in Boulder. And he was an interesting guy. He is very dedicated to the parks, and he would patrol every summer and put a lot of miles on his horse by going up and down Flagstaff Mountain on horseback. So this is actually a ranger who's portraying him, because we tried to find people that had similar types of occupations as these people, which was kind of fun. We think it's really important too, just to get the kids involved, because if they learn to appreciate cemeteries, they'll be more inclined to protect them. So we have scavenger hunts and hikes for kids and that sort of thing, and they actually loved it. Now we'll go over to Superior briefly. Superior Cemetery, the first burial there was 1873, and I think it finally became it was officially designated as a cemetery in 1876. So it went through a couple of different management people. It went through the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company. They operated it for a while, and then it was taken over by Boulder County Parks and Open Space. And I used to be a ranger for Boulder County Parks and Open Space, and that was a place that we were supposed to patrol. I had no idea how to get to it. I mean, at that time you had to go under the tunnel, to get up there. I didn't know that, so I rarely patrolled it. But they were able to, finally, when the town of Superior took it over in 2002, is that right? I think that's right. In 2002, they started really trying to do some good stuff with the cemetery. And one of the first things that they did was put this fence around it. And the fence had chain link that went down 4 feet or so. You can see how the construction has gone right up to it. They also have some wonderful paths in there and these great interpretive signs. So it's been great that there's been some attention paid to it. Well, the chain link fence that went below the surface of the big fence, the metal fence on that it was above, was to keep the prairie dogs out. But there were prairie dogs in there already when they put up the fence. So they had to die off. Eventually they did, of course. But this was a picture I took in the Superior Cemetery, I want to say probably around 2003, because I did some contract work helping to evaluate the markers for repair. And this was one of the prairie dog holes. And you can see there's bones. The prairie dogs are like little archaeologists. I mean, they dig down, they bring up not only bones, but pieces of coffin. And there was Our Darling piece of metal that was found. So, I mean, there's really, the little buggers. You can see that there was fencing also in Superior to designate a plot, but apparently ground penetrating radar was done twice in the cemetery, and they think they found about 90 grave sites in there, but there's only about 32 headstones and 55 documented graves, 22 graves of children as well. So the interesting thing about this fenced one, it's beautiful. It's an ornate fence. People would love to get that to sell the metal. And I'm so glad that you lock up the cemetery, because we've had a lot of vandalism at Columbia. And if you lock up the cemetery, at least you aren't going to get that. And that's probably why that's still there. But there's nobody buried there, according to the ground penetrating radar, which is very interesting. So I was talking with Larry about maybe they disinterred this person. I don't know. I'm not sure what happened. And it's another history mystery that we'll have to look into. This is a little boy, Albert. What was his last name? There was a two-name. Van Olinda. And this young boy probably at one time had a plaque or a picture of some sort on the stone, but that has disappeared over time. So we're not sure exactly what that was. Now, David Vaya was the person contracted to do a number of the headstone repairs in the cemetery, and I think he did most of his work around 2005, and I helped him just by evaluating the markers. And David Vaya did hundreds of repairs in Columbia Cemetery, and I was fortunate enough to meet David when I went to a conference of the Association for Gravestone Studies that was being held in the East Coast, and David was attending, and he led a workshop, conservation workshop, and I was just fascinated, and I thought, well, gosh, could you come to Boulder? And he says, yeah, I have van, we'll travel. So he came to Boulder, and he did a number of hundreds of repairs in our cemetery, as well as doing some in Superior. Now, the one on the left, he did not do, and when I was evaluating that marker, I said, don't touch this, because the concrete, if you tried to get the concrete off of it, it would take part of the stone with it. So some markers, you just have to let them be, or otherwise you'll do some damage. And the one on the right there was one that David, it used to be in that slot above it, but it was pretty much part of it was buried and broken. And David decided rather than try to deal with this very fragile stone, he would simply put it on a rock base, probably lion sandstone, and then he put a couple of little metal L-shaped things that would hold it in place. Now, you have to be very careful with metal around headstones. So his was probably stainless steel or aluminum, because you can see on the left, David there is working in Columbia on a headstone that has a pin that's rusted, and that's a metal iron pin that was frequently used to repair markers back, excuse me, in the day. And when the metal would rust, it would expand and contract and break the stone apart. So that was a big no-no, was using iron pins. He put this one back together by bracing it with some aluminum on both sides and putting some acrylic rods so that you could still see the stone. And that was how that repair worked. So, and just in closing, this is one of my favorite sayings that's on Norland Library at CU. Who knows only his own generation remains always a child. So history is just fabulous for learning. And these are the credits. And that's my program. I'm happy to answer questions.
I have a question. Let me get you on mic because we're filming.
We'll bring it back to you.
How would you tell if somebody was buried at Columbia that was an old Boulder resident? Is there a directory or?
Yeah, Mary McRoberts was the genealogist who researched everybody there except for 500 people. There's 6,500 burials there. She knows where 6,000 of them are buried. And she went through the records and she put information about their birth date, death date, their life story if she had it. The only thing is the ground penetrating radar, we are really wanting to do that in Columbia, but it's not completely reliable. Sometimes it gives false positives. And we're hoping to get that done there to make sure, because people have been buried there and they've run into other burials. So they've just kind of scooched over. So the whole cemetery is kind of a little off, probably, because of that.
Would you tell them that you can't buy your book now, but there is so much in it, and it's available at the Louisville Library, and you don't even begin to touch all the stuff that's in that book. It's just fabulous.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you to say. Yeah, it's unfortunately out of print. Sylvia's trying to talk us into reprinting it. I'm not sure if we will or not, but thank you for that. Appreciate that. It was a labor of love.
You put the visual up on that book.
Oh, yeah, that's, let's see here.
I have another question while you're pulling that up.
What happened?
You get it. Angie will get it for you.
I'm technologically challenged.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I helped an Eagle Scout do a project, the Billion Graves Project at Columbia, where we took a picture of all the headstones and uploaded it to the Billion Graves website. Have you had any inquiries about that at all, or
What's the name of it?
Billion Graves?
No, the only photos that I know about is when we got some grants from the State Historical Fund back in the late 90s. We contracted with a photographer and she took pictures of all the stones. We documented what was on all the stones. But those pictures, we had them up on this wonderful website for the longest time, and the city took it down, messed around with it, and it's not nearly as good as it used to be. But I don't know about that, so I'll have to look into that. So those are all pictures?
The Billion Graves is a national project to upload all the headstones in all cemeteries so people can do genealogy work digitally and from far away.
Fabulous.
And so I was just wondering if you ever had any inquiries, if it ever paid off.
It's not the same as Find a Grave, is it?
No.
Okay, we've had a lot of Find a Grave photos taken at the cemetery. I don't know about that, so yeah, I'd love to talk with you more about it. Thank you. Yes,
Hang on, let's get a mic to you.
right here.
At the very beginning of your presentation,
before you even really got started, you mentioned what you were doing before you took on this project. Can you remind me of what that was?
I was a park ranger for the mountain parks for quite a while. I worked also for the county park, which is why we were supposed to be managing Superior Cemetery. I didn't know where it was, but but that's what I was doing. And then I got too old for firefighting and law enforcement, and I was asked to head up this project that was related to the grants that had been obtained from the State Historical Fund. So I thought you were going to say something about the cemetery serendipity, which is Anna Eggleston is the first person buried in Columbia, as is, what was her, Charlotte? Lottie. Yeah, was an Eggleston, was the first person buried in Superior.
Is that the one, is that the Anna and Lottie, or that, I think the baby that looked like from the dates was only 1 week old when the baby died.
She was very young. I thought she was 2. I don't know.
Well, it might be, it was like your first slide, or one of your very first slides.
The first
So
slide.
maybe it was the first burial.
Oh, you're thinking of Anna Eggleston. That was the one
Anna.
from Columbia.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Their dates of death were only 1 week apart.
She was very young, and that's why we think something happened with childbirth.
For sure.
You know. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and
You're on.
is that working? That's my voice. Well, that was wonderful, and really appreciate you coming out all the way up to Superior.
My pleasure.
And
She found it.
she found it. We on the Historical Commission and the Town Council have been struggling or wrestling with what to do about opening the cemetery. It has a lot of really good interpretive signs in it, but I heard a word Mary said a number of times throughout the show about vandalism, and that's why we've kept it locked. The problem is that it's not easily accessible in spite of the fact we've had that two different renovations, and it's in pretty nice shape right now. And it is accessible. You can call the town number for the town hall, and they'll tell you how to get in. It's
Or me.
or yeah, you can call. I was wondering, yeah, you can also call the community center JG herself, Jennifer Garner, and it's a combination lock. And she was talking too about how to get to the cemetery before they rebuilt Highway 36. You had to park over by Vista Hospital, walk through an underpass and up a hill to get to the cemetery, and the underpass got filled in when they rebuilt US 36. So in the past, we've tried having some tombstone tours. We had it in October, so we got rained out, snowed out, and then construction down, I guess, will be the next one, because of all the construction around it. But it's right behind the sports stable. And you can actually see it from Highway 36 and Denver bound. So keep your eyes peeled, or call one of us. We couldn't take you for a tour.
It's right next to the new dog park.
Right next to the new dog park. The new dog park right next to ours.
It's great. I've been there. But you had like an open house.
Yeah.
It's great.
I didn't do that. Well, the young lady just came up and corrected it again. Is Jennifer Garner, known as JG. I want to thank her for all of her help as our liaison to the city council. And did a great job. And you can thank her for the cookies. So, if you have any other questions, come on down. If you want to ask us in the Historical Commission about more about the cemetery, come on down and we'll visit for a few minutes. But thank you very much for being here tonight.